educated about their health, very involved in taking care of themselves, and yet even in that select group of people, our members, our life extension members, the vast majority of them still were not at optimal levels. Now, the good news is that many more of them were at least not in a deficiency range, which is very important. But regardless, to me, it just points out the value of periodic blood testing and also the importance of dosing with a clinically meaningful dose of vitamin D3. A couple other points for your listeners, which is as one gets older, the body's enzyme system seems to be not as efficient converting that vitamin D3, cholecalciferol, in a supplement into the 25-hydroxy-D level that's measured in the body. There seems to be some difficulty there.
I was going to ask you about an absorption issue. I'm so glad you're mentioning it.
Well, there's been a great deal of speculation about that. There has, for example, been some speculation that the reason that you see a decrease in bioavailability as people get heavier, as they get more and more overweight, if you will, one idea is that the vitamin D, which is a fat-soluble vitamin, is sequestered in fat stores in the body. So it may be that people are absorbing it okay, but it's being sequestered in excess fat stores in the body and therefore is not being reflected in the blood level, the 25-hydroxy-D level in the blood that we test for. There are other ideas as well. People have talked about different types of vitamin D formulations, the difference between cholecalciferol, which is D3, versus ergocalciferol, D2. That's a little controversial. The data suggests, but is not definitive, that cholecalciferol is a better form for supplementation.
Is that D3?
Yes, that's vitamin D3.
Yeah.
The literature suggests that people have more stable levels of vitamin D in their body with cholecalciferol, that's vitamin D3, and also suggests that if one is to stop taking vitamin D3, that the vitamin D levels in the body don't drop off as quickly as if you were taking vitamin D2, which is ergocalciferol. Ergocalciferol is also found naturally in mushrooms, for example. A lot of people aren't aware of that, but you can get D2 in mushrooms.
Interesting. Whatever happened to the fish oils? Are the fish oils still considered the big, important thing to be taking every day?
Well, we feel that omega-3 fatty acid intake, in particular the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids that are found in fish oil, DHA, EPA, these are very, very important for overall health. We know that they're of critical importance for cardiovascular health. There's also some interesting literature looking at the effects of omega-3 fatty acids from fish oils on lipid parameters, in particular triglycerides, as well as metabolic factors, including blood sugar management. So fish oils are wonderful. And there's also evidence, too, as I'm sure you're well aware, and many of your listeners, that the American diet tends to be overloaded with omega-6 fatty acids, whether it's from corn oil, safflower oil, soybean oil even, as opposed to the omega-3 fatty acids, which are so vitally important for health. Probably the optimal ratio of omega-3 fatty acids to omega-6, it shouldn't be any greater than 1 to 3. So, in other words, 3 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3. If it creeps above that, it's probably not optimal. And amazingly, most Americans, their diet is overloaded with omega-6 fatty acids, as in a ratio of anywhere from 10 to 15 omega-6 to omega-3. So 10 to 15 to 1, which is just far too much, an excess of omega-6 fatty acids relative to omega-3.
So if I heard you correctly, and I'm not sure I did, you want for omega-3s 3 times the amount than the omega-6s. Is that correct?
No, it should be no more than, it's a little confusing. An omega-3 to omega-6 ratio shouldn't be more than 1 to 3. In other words, if it's 1 to 10, that's far too much omega-6. A good ratio to strive for is 3 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3.
Got it.
Again, the vast majority of people are ingesting 10 or 15 parts omega-6 to only 1 part omega-3, which is just not optimal.
There's 3 key things I want to ask you about the complexity of the legal scope of challenge that the life extension has. But I want to ask you 2 more questions about some things that the public really hasn't made distinctions about with regard to vitamin E, for example.
Sure.
There's gamma and there's alpha. Would you explain it to them and lay it out? Because I think everybody's taking the one that they're not supposed to be taking.
Well, vitamin E, we've been interested in vitamin E for many years with good reason. There's some great data on vitamin E, but many people don't understand that there are different components of vitamin E. Technically, vitamin E is defined as alpha tocopherol, but there's gamma tocopherol, there's delta tocopherol, and also there are tocotrienols. And the data on tocotrienols is really wonderful. There was a recent study that came out that showed enormous cardiovascular benefits with tocotrienol consumption. So people need to understand that there are differences. When people talk about vitamin E, be specific. Ask, well, do you mean alpha tocopherol, which is what most people think of with vitamin E, or do you mean gamma tocopherol? One thing that's important for all of your listeners to understand is that too much vitamin E in the alpha tocopherol form will tend to displace gamma tocopherol. That's not a good thing. We know that you need to ingest gamma tocopherol as well, and there's some very good data showing a variety of health benefits with gamma tocopherol. So the best strategy is, 1, to obtain vitamin E from foods. Why? Because most of the vitamin E in foods, like almonds, is in the gamma form, gamma tocopherol. Also, it can be difficult obtaining optimal levels of vitamin E alone from food. Other sources include wheat germ. Wheat germ oil, for example, is a pretty good source of vitamin E. But supplementation is important, but what people need to understand is they need to pay attention to that supplement. They also need to take gamma tocopherol along with alpha tocopherol. And again, the tocotrienols, which unfortunately there hasn't been a lot of attention in either mainstream medicine or certainly the mainstream media around tocotrienols, but we know that tocotrienols have wonderful health benefits. So the best approach is balance, as everything in life, which is alpha tocopherol, gamma tocopherol, as well as tocotrienols. That's really the best strategy for vitamin E.
And that's not necessarily what the stores are selling, though. They're selling mixed, and then they're selling alpha for the most part.
Yeah, again, the most important thing is look at that label, because the label must list, well, what form is the vitamin E? And if it's all alpha tocopherol, well, I would suggest that a much better strategy is to look for a supplement that includes gamma tocopherol as well as tocotrienols. Tocotrienols are very important for health, too.
What has happened to B6? Why is it being removed from the market, and why can't you sell it anymore?
Well, B6, there's a particular form called pyridoxamine. And unfortunately, pyridoxamine, for a variety of reasons, which are some complicated, many of which are unfortunate, pyridoxamine, because of its benefits in terms of health, there are pharmaceutical interests that are very focused on this unusual form of vitamin B6. And because of that, there are pharmaceutical interests that have decided to try to patent this form of vitamin B6. And the reason for that is one of the areas that I'm very interested in, and that is glycation. Pyridoxamine is a form of vitamin B6 that's wonderful for inhibiting advanced glycation end products, also known as AGEs. And as I often say, AGEs age you. They age you prematurely. Now, for a while, we were able to offer pyridoxamine to our members. However, because of the way the regulatory environment exists.